There's an old saying in motorsports: how do you become a millionaire in a racing? You start off as a billionaire. The truth is, there's a couple of ways to avoid going broke while racing. One is that you have sponsors pick up the tab, or you can do what Scott Tucker did. That story is coming up right after the break. I don't know if you know this, but I actually now have a merch store, and if you haven't checked out the video description below my videos, then you're missing out. Currently, I've got a pack full of movie quote t-shirts, and more styles are being added every month, and new items are in development right now. So have a look, see if there's anything you like, and wear it with pride. The link is in the video description below. During the pandemic, I had time to watch a lot of TV, and I came across a Netflix show called Dirty Money. It chronicles the stories of hustlers, scammers, and corporate and government corruption. Loved it, got totally into it, and one of my favorite episodes tells the story of a very well-known SCCA racer, a fellow by the name of Scott Tucker. And obviously, because of the car connection, I watched this with great interest. In the episode, Scott Tucker and his attorney partner, Timothy Muir, allegedly bilked 4.5 million struggling Americans out of $2.5 billion through something called payday loans, which are loans that carry high interest rates as high as 1,000%. That's right, 1,000%. It was alleged that Tucker's companies chose to hide their criminal scheme by claiming that their business was owned and operated by Native American tribes, which would have made them immune from prosecution in many of the states in which they were operating. At face value, it seems like a pretty good idea, right? In fact, he was hauled into court a couple of times and won cases because of the exact fact that he was operating on Native American land. Indian tribes were said to have been paid 1% of the total proceeds, and Tucker's companies basically laundered the billions of dollars they took from their customers through tribal bank accounts that were set up to hide Tucker's ownership and control of these payday loan businesses. That's what the feds indicted him for later on. But what was actually at the center of this investigation was the misleading, confusing language in their lending contracts. Now, if you live in the United States, you probably see these applications on the internet if you're doing a payday loan or any type of loan where you see the terms and conditions. There's all sorts of ways to get money online in the United States. But if you wanted to get a payday loan from one of Tucker's companies, it basically worked something like this. Let's say, for example, you were taking out a loan of $500. The Truth in Lending Act box indicated that the finance charge, meaning the dollar amount the loan will cost you, would be $150. And the total of all the payments for a $500 loan would come to $650. That's what it said on the internet, on his website. But if you look at how the loan was structured, buyers were required to pay off the entire loan after the first 2 weeks on their next payday. That's why it's called a payday loan. Borrow $500 today, 2 weeks later, you paid off $650. And if the borrowers didn't pay it over, the loan would roll over and the borrower's bank account would be charged the interest payment and a service fee of $45 to $75 to roll the loan over to the next 2 weeks. And it just kept going on, and the interest was added to that. But the feds claimed that this wasn't spelled out clearly enough in the language of the contract that you read online. Although the TILA box stated that a $500 loan would cost the customer only $650 to repay, the fine print and the reference links next to the hyperlinks where, in the fine print, it painted a very different picture of the true cost of the loan. You had to click on these little links and then read the whole document to figure this out, and you really needed to be paying attention. Most people just blindly check the box and say, oh yeah, that I actually read all those documents, went through all the fine print and followed the hyperlinks and all that stuff. Most people don't do that. They don't read the fine print, and that's a problem. Others may have actually read through the hyperlinks but didn't understand the terms and obligations due to the confusing language in the contract. Tucker and his attorney claimed that their contracts are basically standard loan contracts used by more than 100 lending institutions here in the United States at the time, and they should not have been confusing to anyone. Yeah, fine print, right? While the amounts set forth in the Tucker payday lender's loan paperwork varied according to the amounts borrowed, basically it came down to this. The average borrower would be led to believe that they would pay only $30 in interest for every $100 borrowed. That was not the case if they did not pay off the full loan within 2 weeks. After that, the fees started mounting and the interest compounded. By the government estimates, Tucker pocketed $400 million from these loans. No wonder why he could afford a race team. So looking for more information, I stumbled across a 2017 interview with Scott Tucker himself, where Scott blamed the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for selective enforcement and hinting about overreach, essentially saying dumb people who don't know how to manage their finances need to pay attention to what they sign, or otherwise they're going to pay through the nose. Wow, he's a nice guy. What a wonderful guy. This is like saying to a cop who pulled you over, "Why did you pull me over? Everybody else was speeding." We call it whataboutism. It's a douche move and cops really hate it, and it's juvenile. Oh, he was doing it too, mommy. Oh. To me, Tucker's podcast was totally tone deaf. In my opinion, the guy is a predatory lender, and the fact is that he was trying to escape prosecution by working with Indian tribes, and that clearly shows intent to me, in my opinion. Today, payday loans still have a bad rap. These high-interest payday loans still exist and are still regulated by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So if you're considering doing that, any kind of thing, you want to think about that twice. For those who don't know, the CFPB was created specifically to combat predatory lending following the mortgage industry collapse in 2008 here in the United States. Clearly, the feds wanted to make an example of Tucker, who seemed to be doing anything and everything to skirt the rules, especially by hiding behind Indian tribes. According to investigators, Scott Tucker's payday loan setup was said to be charging 2 to 3 times what the New York Mafia was charging. In February of 2016, it all came crashing down. Tucker was arrested for various criminal violations under the RICO and TILA statutes. Tucker claimed to be innocent of all charges, of course, claiming that he was using standard industry contracts and alluded that banks were also being predatory, so why was he getting singled out? For his part, Tucker claimed in his Netflix interview that he was providing a service to an underserved population. That's kind of like Hugh Grant getting caught with a prostitute and basically saying, "I was just trying to give a homeless person a hot meal." Basically, he was saying that he was providing a service to people who had no other option, so it was either him or nothing. Not a very good excuse. In the indictments, the feds found evidence contradicting all of Tucker's claims, many of them anyway. For starters, the feds found that Muir and other attorneys for Tucker prepared false factual declarations from tribal representatives that were submitted to state courts that falsely claimed, among other things, that the tribal corporations were owned, controlled, and managed most of the portions of Tucker's businesses that were targeted by state enforcement actions. Basically, he was trying to shift the blame to these tribal organizations, right? The feds then also discovered that Tucker opened bank accounts to operate and receive the profits of the payday lending enterprise, which were nominally held by tribally owned corporations, but which were in fact owned and controlled by Tucker himself. It was all a smokescreen. He was using the Indian tribes as a front, essentially, is what it comes down to. The feds calculated that Tucker received over $380 million from these accounts and spent these monies on lavish personal expenses, some of which were spent on a fleet of Ferraris, Porsches, and covering the expenses of a professional auto racing team, a private jet, a luxury home in Aspen, Colorado, and even paying his own personal taxes from all those monies, which were not to be mixed. Federal wiretap recordings showed that employees of Tucker's payday loan enterprises were coached and told borrowers over the phone using scripts that were directed and approved by Tucker and Muir that they were operating in Oklahoma and Nebraska, where the tribes were located, when in fact they were actually operating at Tucker's corporate headquarters in Kansas. And this was to deceive borrowers into believing that they were dealing with actual Native American tribes. It was all a sham, it was all a scam. They even talked about the weather in those cities. These deceptions succeeded for a long time, going back as far as 1997, and the several state courts dismissed enforcement actions against Tucker's payday lending businesses based on claims that they were protected by sovereign immunity that the Native American tribes hold in these states. In reality, the tribes neither owned nor operated any part of Tucker's payday lending business. That was all a sham. The tribes made no payment to Tucker to acquire any portions of the businesses that they were purported to own. Tucker continued to operate his lending businesses from a corporate headquarters in Kansas, and Tucker continued to reap the profits of the payday lending businesses, which generated over $3.5 billion in revenue from just 2008 to June 2013, in substantial part by charging struggling borrowers high interest rates expressly forbidden by state laws, since they were doing it on the internet and they were doing it hiding behind businesses set up on native land, they were immune. In October of 2017, Tucker, who was 55 at the time, and Muir, who was 46, were convicted on all 14 counts in the indictment, including 1 count of conspiring to commit racketeering through the collection of unlawful debt, 3 counts of participating in a racketeering enterprise through the collection of unlawful debt, 1 count of wire fraud, 1 count of conspiring to commit money laundering, 2 counts of money laundering, and 5 counts of violating the Truth in Lending Act, TILA, as we call it in the United States in the financial world. This was some heavy stuff. Racketeering is the stuff that they get mafia guys with, right? Tucker received a 16-year sentence, and Muir, his accountant, got 7 years in prison. The FTC jumped in and slapped Tucker with a $1.3 billion fine for fraud after that. In April of 2021, the Supreme Court, though, overruled that decision. Still, it didn't matter. By that time, a SWAT team had come into Tucker's house and arrested him in front of his wife and his horrified daughter. Blaine Tucker, Scott's brother, was also getting caught up in the scandal, and in 2014 he decided to commit suicide by jumping off a 6-story parking garage. That wasn't a cry for help. That guy wanted to die. Sad. In the Netflix show, though, Scott tells his side of the story. At one point, I actually started to feel sorry for the guy. But when I did more research, I got a clearer picture of the man behind the man. One story that emerged was that not long after Tucker graduated from Kansas State University in the 1980s, a federal grand jury charged him with fraud in connection to a bogus investment banking operation called Chase, Morgan, Stearns, and Lloyd, which is a corporate name that was borrowed from various legitimate investment banks to give people the illusion that he was a legit guy. Now, I don't know what else could indicate more clearly that this guy's intent was not honorable. Tucker was convicted and spent a year in prison. So with that staple to every job application, he'd have to strike out on his own. So in my opinion, from all the evidence, this guy clearly had a problem with his moral compass from the outset. In fact, when Netflix asked him on camera if he considered himself to be a moral man, he paused, a really long pause, and he basically responded that he was a businessman. He couldn't even reply with a simple yes or no answer. Couldn't do it. And so, like many who have climbed the ladder of success on the backs of others, Tucker's actions before and after his indictment give us great insight to his mindset. Another story I came across was pretty interesting. It was an incident covered in the local news, documented Tucker's actions revolving around a simple traffic stop he got one night. One night back in 2008, as the story goes, a deputy sheriff in Kansas ticketed Scott Tucker after clocking his Mercedes-Benz CLS 63 going 86 miles per hour in a stretch of Interstate 35 where the speed limit was 60 miles per hour. 2 days later, what does he do? Tucker's wife, his brother, and his sister-in-law, as well as several businesses tied to his payday loan companies, suddenly donated a total of $4,000 to the campaign of a candidate for the local district attorney, the office that prosecutes traffic tickets. Rather than just, get an attorney, plead it down and all kinds of stuff, his answer was to bribe these people. The ticket was dropped to improper parking. Wow, what a coincidence. Well, give a donation, ticket gets dropped. In my opinion, this is some Russian oligarch nonsense. This is kind of the stuff rich people do to skirt the rules, and in my opinion, it speaks to one's character. Fighting a ticket in court is one thing. Paying off government officials is an entirely different matter, and this country is corrupt. Curiously, Scott never mentioned what he did for a living among his fellow racers at the SCCA racing events. Was he ashamed of it? Did he want to keep it on the DL for modesty? Modesty was not likely his motive, given that he was driving Ferraris and Porsches in SCCA and had a massive race team and million-dollar transporter vehicles. In my opinion, I interpreted Scott's reticence to discuss his business as a sign that he didn't want anyone looking into his business dealings, or that he knew what he was doing wouldn't be well received among his colleagues and peers. It didn't matter though. The government caught up with him eventually, and when they did, it all unraveled quickly. Justice came swiftly. He was indicted in 2016 and convicted in late 2017. Tucker is still sitting behind bars, and his attorney lost an appeal in 2020, and the government has been dismantling Tucker's empire ever since his conviction. And it got really ugly really quickly. On February 13th, 2018, the court entered a preliminary order of forfeiture, which ordered the forfeiture of any property constituting or derived from any proceeds obtained directly or indirectly from the unlawful collections of debt charged charged in counts 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the initial indictment. In other words, they were going to take everything he had. They went after every asset, every holding, every bank account, every brokerage account, including funds in a Charles Schwab account and any and all funds in a Midwest Trust Company account, and all right and title to real property in Aspen, Colorado, and the $2.1 million house in Leawood, Kansas. All of it. They wanted it all. In 2019, they actually emptied out the entire contents of his house, and everything was sold as an estate sale as a result of this forfeiture as well. So it was cleaned out. Next, the feds came for his actual houses and his personal property, and his expensive collection of race cars were also all seized and sold at an auction in 2020. Tucker's 4 cars earned about $3.78 million in total at auction, and all of that money was to be distributed to the victims of his payday loan scam. Ouch. $4 at a time after attorney's fees, right? Your settlement has arrived. Here's your check for $4.15, that kind of thing. The cars that were sold included a 2011 Ferrari 599XX, which sold for the most amount of money, going for about $1.6 million. There was a Ferrari 599 Aperta was next to go, and it went for about just a little over $1 million, $1,025,000 or something like that. A 2005 Porsche Carrera GT got, I think, just under 700 grand, like $690,000. He also had a Porsche 911 GT2 RS, which went for just under $500,000, around $470,000 or so. No word on his Learjet, but as of 2016, I believe the feds grabbed it too while it was sitting in Chesterfield, Missouri at a private airport. The $8 million home in Aspen sold in August of 2020 for actually $10 million by that time. His wife, Kim, though, divorced him in 2020, it looks like, but I found her on IMDb. Her only credit was her appearance on Netflix Dirty Money episode chronicling the collapse of Tucker's empire. The trail goes cold from there. There's just not much more about what happened to her or the daughter after all this unraveled, so I feel sorry for her and for the daughter. But Scott's troubles are still far from over, unfortunately. In November of 2021, Tucker pleaded guilty to 1 count of filing a fraudulent tax return. This earned him another 3-year sentence, which he's going to serve concurrently, and he's been ordered to pay $40 million in restitution. $40 million. Maybe he can get a payday loan.
Oh, that's cold.
He's scheduled to be released from prison in March of 2032. Only 10 more years. This story and others like the ones I've chronicled are why I'm always a little skeptical when I meet new people driving supercars at events. There are plenty of people who achieve success the old-fashioned way. They earn it, and you should be skeptical too. That's it for this episode, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to check out my merch store. We'll see you next time.